David Lammy, hello.
Hello.
Will the Labour Party beat Nigel Farage?
Yes, I think we will.
How?
There's a lot of ingredients to that. The first is cost of living. You have to meet people on the central issue for them, and that is prices, their daily shop, their utility bills, and demonstrating that you're doing something for them by the time, obviously, of the next election, given the scale of the challenge and the economy that we inherit. You have obviously got to meet them with your values. They've got to know what you stand for, and up against the populist right, who are picking fights 3 or 4 times a day. There is something around how progressive parties are demonstrating that they're on the side of people and where their values are from. And I think there's something also about patriotic democratic renewal. People want to believe, particularly working people, that you are that you have a belief in somewhere, in their country, in their place, in their home. And if you like, the challenge sometimes for progressives as a cosmopolitan party does not land where people are given the hardships that they're experiencing in their daily community. So democratic renewal and the security piece is also very important as well.
We're talking because the thesis we're discussing now features in this week's New Statesman. Delightful cover, No More Kings, call to abolish the monarchy. You're a monarchist, aren't you, David? I do believe.
Oh, I am a monarchist.
That hurts to see. It hurts to see.
You've got it there, love.
Get rid of it. No, so broadly, the thesis of your essay, you say the left is winning internationally, right? And
well, actually, more than that, I say, look, if you look at the 23 elections over the course of the last year, you get the impression we're losing in every single one of them. We've won in more than half of them. So can we lift our spirits and not talk down
cheer up, Ol.
the possibility of winning? But also it's the case that progressive parties in the midterms, and that's a bit accelerated, and certainly for us, the midterms has come sooner than we would have liked, but everyone knows that politics is happening much faster. Progressive parties in the midterms can look to be doing very badly, look a bit broader than that, look across all progressive voters, and look at where they can end in the cycle. There's lots of reasons for hope.
When I think about who the big players are on the international stage, it might be Trump, it might be Meloni, it might be Orban, it might be Milei. They seem to be from the right. Le Penism is on the rise. It's probably at its strongest point it's ever been in France. AfD leading the polls in Germany. My sense is if we do add up the elections, okay, yeah, the progressives, the left, they're doing better. But I don't know, maybe it's just a vibe that the big players on the international scene, they are from the radical right. They're not from the left.
That phrase, big players, worries me because you could pick Carney, Storr, Albanese, you could go to Denmark, you could go to what's just happened in the Netherlands as well. So slight challenge to who you think the big characters are. I'm simply saying that progressives can win. Their formula, of course, is different to the populist right. It has to be. It depends what kind of government you want. But this is the time to gather the fight, to gather the courage, to try and stay united, as challenging as it is, particularly in the social media environment.
Maybe it's revealing about my psyche that I think those people are the big players and maybe not the ones you highlighted, David. Okay, you mentioned Canada. One of the international comparisons that you make in your piece, you draw optimistic inspiration from Canada, and the story there, from a 20-point low, the Liberals come back, Mark Carney oversees this dramatic election win. Key part of that story, the Liberals had a deeply unpopular leader who resigned. You have a deeply unpopular leader too.
Oh, come on. I mean, there would have been moments in Trudeau's story where he was unpopular over the course of his over 8 years in office. So I think you've got to get a bit deeper than that. Now, let's get behind Canada's election win and some of the ingredients of it.
Please.
There's something about nationhood, and clearly the threat of tariffs and their position with the United States enabled Carney to tell a story about what it means to be a Canadian and own that renewal space that's about state statehood. He also centred that basically on security, also their contribution to Ukraine, and definitely fiscally and in terms of cost of living, there was a sense that he could answer their challenges. You see something similar, I think, in Australia, and you see something similar in Norway. So the ingredients, the formula, as I've suggested, is there, and of course we can do it.
The final line of your essay is change is how we win again. So what needs to change? What do we change to win?
People have to feel better in their pockets by the time of the next election. Of course, because of austerity and because of where we found public services, there's got to be a sense of improvement. Now, for most people, that's the National Health Service, and the huge waiting times have got to have come down. But there is also a sense in which sometimes that's priced in for progressive governments in terms of health. So on the railway network, on schools, look, and let's talk about the things that we have done. The minimum wage has gone up under us. Wages have gone up under us. Young families who've got small children in nurseries, 7,500 we're putting into their pockets on nursery places, breakfast clubs. Waiting lists have gone down. We also have to tell the story, the progressive story of what we have done. And we've done a lot just in 14 months.
What about potential tax rises in the next budget? How does that put more money in people's pockets?
You know I can't talk about that because that's Rachel Reeves's job. I do not want to suggest that the fiscal environment and the absolute desire to get growth in our economy, and as a result, jobs and rising salaries and falling inflation as a result, is not hard. That is definitely a tough environment here in the United Kingdom. But we have to deliver over time. And I'm absolutely sure if we don't deliver that over time by the next election, we will absolutely be on the back foot. There's no doubt about that.
OK, second component part of your argument then, unifying the left and centre. What does that look like in the UK context?
Well, look, this is a first past the post system for sure. We have to focus people's mind in the progressive family of voters about, in the end, that fight against Farage. And the truth is that parties like the Labour parties have to be broad coalition parties to win. You do have to pick up votes from Conservatives who are disheartened and have remained disheartened after the botched Brexit that many Conservative voters didn't actually want. You do have to pick up voters who are horrified by the prospect of reform. You have to pick up voters who feel they want to vote Green because of the climate challenges that we have, and voters who find the cuddly proposition of the Liberal Democrats attractive, even though actually the portfolio of policies isn't that great when you get underneath all of that. That usually focuses as you get to a general election, in truth. But I would be weary because we've obviously just had an election in Caerphilly. I would not put into that box in quite the same way the nationalist parties, which also play to some of the instincts of what we're seeing on the right.
Tell me more about that. Why wouldn't you put them in the same category?
Well, because look, if you actually look at Scottish, and look at what the SNP have done for the health service in Scotland, it's not fantastic. And actually, in the end, real progressives aren't about breaking up the country, and there's something about breaking up the union that the Labour Party has always been implacably against, and I'm certainly against. It's the politics of division, effectively.
I want to come back to something you said in your previous answer, but this is really interesting to me because I don't dispute your point. I think that progressives will unite in a way to contain reform wherever they are. And I think we are going to see tactical voting of the kind that was really just fully on display in Caerphilly. First time it's ever not been a Labour seat, and Plaid Cymru are there collecting the vote. And I don't see a reason why that won't be the case if the Lib Dems are in second place, if Labour's in second place, hell, if the Greens are the best person to go to. That voters won't go, no, you know what, the number one priority, we have to stop Farage and we'll choose whoever is the best person to do that.
Well, there's a little bit of historic reflection. I actually arrived in Parliament back in 2000, about the time that Tony Blair was becoming a bit unpopular and his honeymoon was coming to an end. This was the time of fuel protests. This was the time when he was slow hand clapped by the Women's Institute, which is an organisation that most people do not expect any prime minister to be slow hand clapped by. And we were beginning to lag in the polls. So midterm blues for incumbent governments are not unusual. So there's that set of issues. Then there is also a broader discussion about progressives and how they fare in office in terms of governing successfully in a vicious social media environment where the populist right are united and well-financed and well-organized globally, in a context of conspiracy theories, in a context sometimes where our authoritarian opponents abroad are also stirring the pot to manifest discontent and to try and see progressives out of government. So look, I'm not saying the environment today is not tough, and I'm not saying also that there aren't midterm challenges for governments like ours. There are. But it's that, can you come through that if you demonstrate, if you in a way forget the noise, if you demonstrate for ordinary voters on the ground by the time of a general election on cost of living a sense that you understand a sense of place and identity and security, if you're restoring public services genuinely, if you're not fighting on the fringes of identity politics but actually in the centre ground of politics, if you can pull that off, can you win? Yes, you can, is my answer.
A couple of answers ago, you said that the Labour Party is a broad church. Do you believe the Labour Party to be a broad church?
The Labour Party in government, historically, whether it's 1948, whether it's the period in the 60s and then 70s under Wilson, obviously the Blair years, and then winning again, is always a broad church when it wins. In opposition, it becomes rather smaller. But when it's winning, it's usually a broad church. And what I mean by that is, of course, there's a segment of the population who will always vote Labour, although that has got smaller, as it has for the Conservatives as well. We have to pick up votes from people who have previously voted Conservative but might vote for us. And we have also got to persuade people who might vote Green or might vote Lib Dem that we are the party of choice. We are a broad church party. That is always the case in a first-past-the-post system.
When did you last speak to Jeremy Corbyn?
Jeremy's my neighbour, in Islington North. So of course, Jeremy's office and my office, we've got their border issues. We're in contact with each other. I haven't got any personal enmity to Jeremy. I've known him for many, many years.
There's a reason I ask, because if we're talking about a broad church, the last leader of the party, obviously from a left-wing tradition within the party, he's now starting his own thing. He's external. The Greens, with Zach Polanski under this new eco-populist direction, they're polling around the same as the Labour Party. And so the challenge, I think, for the Labour Party is, how does it reconcile with that? Is it actually a home for progressive voters, or does the polling bear out that they're looking elsewhere? They're going to different places. It might be a Your Party email list. It might be voting for the Greens in their local constituency.
Well, again, if you go back to Tony Blair when things were getting a bit rockier, we lost the Brent East by-election to the Liberal Democrats in London. And it was a big moment where people said, oh, look, the progressives have gone in a different direction. If you look at Australian Labour in cities like Sydney, people voting teal and voting green, again, nevertheless, in a first past the post system. So the phenomenon of some in the progressive family, perhaps a bit more purist in their position on politics, feeling discontent for governing centre-left parties once you govern is not unusual. You do have to focus on the mainstay of the electorate by the time of the electorate, understanding also that turnout is an issue. In by-elections, in local elections. In the end, in this conversation, I'm focused on general election results and why you do see, as I say, 23 elections this last year, and in half of them, progressives actually retaining power, even though the dominant narrative is that the populist right is winning in everything.
The final component part of your philosophy for victory is security. Are the British people safe under a Labour government?
Oh, I think that one of the highest moments and the moment that I was most proud of when I was Foreign Secretary was the moment after Trump and Zelensky are in the Oval Office. The whole world just sort of, their shoulders just drop, their jaws drop, really, with what that meant. And then the next day, there is Zelensky walking up number 10 and getting this warm embrace from Keir Starmer. There was a sense that Britain was back where the global community wanted us to be. And the sense of pride I felt from the British people in that moment was immense. So on Ukraine, I think that was hugely important. By the way, I also think it was important for us to recognise the state of Palestine, and I'm very proud of the role that I played in that, because it says something about your values as well. I do think that on issues of security, at a time when behind those electricity bills, behind those prices, the war in Ukraine, the pandemic, the climate emergency, there's something about security playing larger in people's minds than it has done in the past. There is an anxiousness about the geopolitical environment, and I think people do expect the government of the day, and certainly a progressive government, to be in the centre ground, reassuring on security. And again, in Denmark, in Norway, in Canada, in Australia, these are parties not ceding the security issue to their political opponents.
You're right. Security isn't just an international component, is it? It can relate to energy policy. It can relate to climate policy. It can relate to the border. And obviously, it's domestic as well. Just in the space of the last week, we've all seen this horrific video that's going around on social media, right? This dog walker that's been stabbed to death. We've had a multiple stabbing in Blackpool, and at the weekend, the mistaken release of a convicted sex offender onto the streets of Britain. That's just the last week. So when I say to you, is Britain safe under a Labour government? That's also what I'm driving at.
Yeah, look, I've set up a independent investigation into why and how there was an early release of a foreign national offender who'd committed an awful crime against a minor and a woman onto our streets. I got the sense, both from the commentary of the media, but also from the public, that people understand that our public services are not in the place that they should be, particularly not in the place that they should be after austerity, but also after actually quite high tax burden on behalf of the British people. We've got to do better. We've got to demonstrate that we can do better. But I think behind your question is also migration. And let us remember, the Labour Party is called Labour for a reason. It is the party of working people, and working people raise the issue of migration. And the reason they raise the issue of migration is its effects on the labour market and public services as well. And they want a sense of rules and fairness. And they so absolutely it's important. Again, if you look at progressive social democrat parties that are winning, they tend to be demonstrating that they are doing something on relation to migration, standing up for those who could come to the country legally, of course, whether they're claiming asylum, but being absolutely crystal clear that if you're coming illegally, we're going to do something about it.
You also say in your piece that whilst that is true, there is a dividing line, and you have to open up a dividing line with reform. And there's a line that you use. You say, when a policy is racist, we will call it that.
Yes, I think
racist.
Yeah, that's about being crystal clear on your values. I am not for the politics of managerialism. Progressive parties cannot just be the best people who happen to once work in the public services and fall into managerial speak. We have to be about values. The populists, I don't like their values, but they're crystal clear on their values. They're picking those fights every day. We have to be in a similar place for our values. And so where a policy is racist, you call it racist.
Is there a specific example of that?
Well, look, I think that what we've seen in the last few days, actually it's worse than a dog whistle. This idea that black people, when they're turning up in adverts or on television, somehow aren't part of the British story, really pains me, because that's the sort of thing you were hearing in the 1950s when my dad arrived in the country. It's so backward, it's unbelievable. We are a multi-ethnic, multicultural country. We have people who are black and brown voting for different political parties. That's where we've arrived at. And actually, I still believe Britain is doing demonstrably well in that area than other European countries. Let's celebrate that and not talk it down, and let's call it out when mainstream apparent politicians are appealing to people's most basest and racist instincts.